Welcome to Life After Fame podcast. Just imagine 70,000 fans cheering your name when you've scored the winning touchdown. Imagine standing on stage looking out at the crowd, rocking out to that chart-busting song you created. The applause and recognition you received for your masterful acting performance in that latest blockbuster movie. And then, one day, the cheering stops. This podcast is all about catching up with these stars of yesterday to find out where they're at now and who they are as people, beyond the stardom. This is a true human interest podcast about the people we loved to root for. And now, your hosts, Joe Mastriona and Joe Boglino.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of Life After Fame podcast series, where we delve into captivating stories and remarkable achievements of extraordinary individuals and what their lives are like now. Life After Fame is a true human interest podcast intended to entertain, educate, inspire, and foster a sense of community among all of us as fellow human beings. Today, we have the honor of introducing a true Canadian football legend, Jed Roberts. Born in 1967 in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Jed Roberts has left an indelible mark on the field as a defensive end and linebacker. At 6'2" and weighing 265 pounds, he possessed both the physical prowess and unwavering determination that made him a force to be reckoned with. Jed honed his skills at the University of Northern Colorado, where he earned recognition as a first-team All-North Central Conference linebacker in 1989. His impressive performance led to his inclusion in the university's 50-year football dream team in 2002, a testament to his enduring impact on the game. The highlight of Roberts' illustrious career came during his tenure with the Edmonton Eskimos, where he played from 1990 to 2002. In 1993, he played a pivotal role in the Eskimos' Grey Cup triumph and showcased his dominance by recording an impressive 10 quarterback sacks that season. Throughout his career, Roberts garnered numerous accolades and honors, including being named a Tom Pate nominee in 2000. He also etched his name into the record books with remarkable achievements, setting the Edmonton Eskimos' single-game record for most special teams tackles in a playoff game in 1999, and the franchise record for most special teams tackles in a game with 5 against the BC Lions in 2000. In fact, he holds the esteemed title of having the most special teams tackles in a career with an impressive 163, tying him for 4th place in the history of the Canadian Football League. Today, we sit down with Jed Roberts. We aim to uncover the stories behind his extraordinary career, the lessons he learned along the way, and the single biggest challenge he faced in his life, as well as his playing career, of being hearing impaired. Join us as we reminisce on unforgettable moments, legendary plays, and the sheer passion he brought to the gridiron. You're not going to want to miss this episode of Life After Fame.
Today on Life After Fame, we have a very unique guest from our neighbors in the north. Jed Roberts, 13-year CFL football professional, joins Life After Fame. Jed, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited. It's a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to talking some sports and whatever else comes up.
Well, it's nice to have you. And you have a really unique story, a unique journey into professional sports. So let's just start with that. And you're hard of hearing, or I guess let me let you describe the degree of hearing loss that you have.
Yeah, I actually have a bilateral congenital nerve defect, and that's just a fancy way of saying I can't hear really well. Both nerves, when I was being formed in the uterus there, and I was an embryo, the nerves weren't fully formed. And so it's different to your typical inner ear. There's no surgery for it. It's not like I can get a coil and, kind of, move on from that. It's a spectrum, right? Some people with the nerve defect, they can't hear anything. Some people with the nerve defect can hear half or whatever. If I was to put it in layman's terms, in percentages, I could probably hear about 2% in my right ear and about 5% in my left ear. I wasn't fitted for hearing aids until relatively late. I got fitted with my first hearing aid when I was about 5 years old. We went to the University of Chicago. I'll back up. I was born in Ottawa, Ontario. My mom and dad met in college at the University of Kansas. My dad played for 7 years with the Ottawa Rough Riders Football Club. I was born in 67. My dad won Grey Cup championships in 68 and 69. And then in 70, he was unceremoniously cut halfway through the season. He waited around thinking he was going to get a phone call. There's kind of an interesting story around that. CFL was paying their athletes more than the NFL was. San Francisco offered him a tryout. He said, thanks, but no thanks. I'll wait for something else to come up, and nothing ever did. So he got a job down in Chicago. My parents knew there was something going on with me because I was kind of missing milestones. I wasn't really talking. I'd babble, like I had a babbling stage, but I wasn't really catching the words and I wasn't saying them properly. One of my favorite words, one of my favorite things to do was whenever a truck would go by the car, I would yell truck, but I wouldn't yell truck. I would yell something completely inappropriate. So my dad used to put his hand on my mouth whenever we were out in public and I'd start screaming that word. So, I mean, my mom and dad, they knew something was going on. They took me in to get my first hearing aid when we moved from Ottawa to Chicago for a year. And I went to the University of Chicago and I got my hearing tested. And the doctors told my parents that day a couple of different things. The first thing they said was, your son is severely, like profound hearing loss is what they call it. It's just one step above being completely deaf. And they said that your son is developmentally disabled. He will likely never speak. We would recommend that you teach him how to sign or, and try to get him into a residential treatment program of some sort so he can learn some basic life skills. So the first school I ever went to, it was a day program just outside of Elgin, Illinois, out in the country. And they had a bunch of kids, about 35 of us in the same room. And it wasn't all deaf kids. There were a couple blind kids in there. And you got to keep in mind, this was the early 70s. And this was kind of the way they did things back then. I mean, they didn't mainstream kids. They just segregated kids. And we were all kind of thrown in this little hodgepodge mishmash of just kids like cerebral palsy, spinal bifida. We had kids that were fetal alcohol, autistic kids. And we were all in the same room. It was like almost something out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I remember very vividly the first hearing aid I got it came on what looked like a bra. And I had to wear it over my shirt. And, it was very obvious to everybody around me that this was a hearing impaired kid. And I just hated that thing. And the first day I got it, I ran down the hill from my house and I dove into a puddle and destroyed that hearing aid. So then they went back and they replaced it and gave me one that went over the ear. So I got an over the ear hearing aid that I only wore one. And I refused to wear two until I actually turned 22 years old. And I moved to Edmonton, started playing here. Met an audiologist who convinced me to start wearing two. And when it wasn't until he started he convinced me because I respected him so much. Not that I didn't respect anybody else before him, but I just had a relationship with him and that I felt comfortable enough to trust him that he knew what he was talking about. I had no idea how much I'd been missing for the previous, years of my life. And so it was, something as fundamental as being in school,
How much hearing did he say, because you were just wearing the one?
I always wore one in my right ear, which was like the 2%. So I could jack that up. I had a little bit more hearing in this ear. So try to balance it out a little bit. So it wasn't quite so. And I used to talk out the side of my mouth. And the reason I did that was because I could hear my voice on that one ear. My kids were making fun of me the other day because I watched an old interview after a football game. I was completely talking out of the side of my mouth. They're like, why are you talking like that? And I said, well, I used to wear only one hearing aid.
So, the theme of this show is, I think, to remove the taboo that hearing loss has. And I'll tell you just a brief personal story. My daughter has profound hearing loss. And when she was born, we were just absolutely stunned, devastated. I would remember when I was in 6th grade, this was back in the 70s as well, I had a girl in my class and she had a hearing issue. And she looked like she wore a speaker around her chest. And so that's what I had in my head.
Big silver box.
And she also had a speech impediment. So we're told in 2000, the birth of our daughter, that she can't hear. And I'm thinking the same thing in my mind. Well, she's going to have to wear something around her chest. And what's her life going to look like? Now, I will tell you, so to have you on today is a great demonstration of whether or not this was an obstacle or not, we'll get to. But what I've realized is that what my wife and I have realized is that our daughter has opened us up to an entire world we never knew existed, and we're better for it. And she's been, because they caught it so early, and I guess that they test for hearing right at the day that they're born. She's had hearing aids in her ears since she was, old enough to get fitted for them, which was months old. And she's operational, perfectly fine. She has an attitude, and when she doesn't want to hear us, she turns her hearing aids off. And But so here's what's cool about our journey in this world, as well as your journey. You played 13 years for the Edmonton Eskimos. 13 years. Now, you did it with this, I guess, I don't know if you call it a disability. I guess we can call it a disability for the terms of today. But Jed, when you look at athletes who have had these conditions and what they've achieved, there's normal people who don't have those issues and they achieve or they don't achieve. Think about the guy that comes to mind here is Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. He had Tourette's syndrome, and that Tourette's made him laser focused on the game. And in fact, they call him the pre-Steph Curry. That disability actually seemed to have benefited his game. Can you talk about how your hearing disability, while it may have presented a challenge to the most of us, do you think it stopped you from going to the NFL, but how did you use that to your advantage to make a 13-year career in professional football?
Yeah, I think that it didn't help. Being hearing impaired certainly didn't, make things easier. I don't know that it prevented me from getting in the NFL. That's a great question. And it's not one that I've actually ever answered very often, oddly enough, considering the fact that I've lived with this my entire life. I don't tend to talk about it very much. I just, it happened and I'm here, right? So one of the things that I noticed, I never wore hearing aids when I played until I got to my last year of high school. That was the first year I wore one in-ear hearing aid. And I'll never forget, I didn't realize how violent the game sounded. I never knew what it sounded like when people hit each other. When I take my hearing aids off, it's completely silent. It's the most peaceful. It is amazing. I love it. If you were to say to me, Jed, we're going to operate on your ears, we're going to give you hearing back. And I'd be like, no, thanks. I like being able to sleep and, fall asleep in 2 minutes and tune out my parents or my wife or my kids or whatever. I can concentrate when I'm trying to do something. So yeah, the laser focus.
Teenager's dream, right?
Yeah, it's awesome, man. It's like a superpower.
Yeah.
And, the workarounds that I learned, you learn to pick up other things. And one of the things that I used to do was body language. I got really good at learning how to lip read. I spent maybe 8 years with a speech therapist to learn how to form sounds, vowels, SH, CH. It was very difficult. And it was hands-on. I'd have my hand on the speech therapist's throat. She'd have hers on mine, and we would copy and duplicate and mimic sounds. It was a lot of work, and it was very difficult. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I'm really glad I did it because I made the decision early on. They left it in my court. They said, if you want to learn how to sign, we'll support that. But if you want to learn how to talk, then we can try that too. And I was very adamant that I didn't want to learn how to sign. I do know a little bit of sign. Most of it's inappropriate. I learned it in college. I took a couple sign language classes. And my boys know how to sign because we fool around sometimes when we're talking long distance. We'll sign to each other a little bit. But when I wasn't playing football, it didn't help because I needed to be able to hear the audibles. And an audible is when the linebacker on defense yells out that the play is going to be changed because you see something in the formation that you want to change the play away from what you called in the huddle to a different play. And audibles are a fact of life on offense. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't play offense as much. I did play running back and tight end and a bunch of other positions on offense, but it was very difficult for me to hear the signals when I had my back to the quarterback. And so when I was playing defense, I was facing the quarterback, and I'm not sure why that made such a difference, but it did. And so what I had to learn to do was get in the room with the linebacker, the guy that made the calls, and spend time with the linebacker and ask him, say, when do you change the call and why? And so I had to be basically a second linebacker in there. And I couldn't always rely on hearing him call it. I would have to be able to see the formation and see the same thing he did and then make that adjustment in my mind between plays from a 3-point stance with 20 seconds to make that call and figure out where the receivers are. So you had to really look around. And so when you talk about Abdul Rauf, he had to really concentrate to make sure that he was able to play at that level. And it was the same thing for me. I just was missing that one sense. So I relied a little bit more heavily on the other ones that I had left. And,
so,
yeah.
Jed,
awesome.
when you played, you said, were you a down lineman or you were a linebacker?
Yeah, I started as a linebacker. I couldn't backpedal. I was terrible. In the CFL, there's unlimited motion. So you got to be able to see where the receivers end up on the line, because they'll scramble around. It's not just one guy going in motion like down in the States. It's 5 guys running around. It looks like a fire drill, like a clown car, like people all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's really, and my defensive coordinator, I remember asking him, I said, well, how do you tell? And he said, it's not where they start, it's where they hit the line when the ball snapped. And that took years. It took me a couple of years to develop a system where I knew I didn't have to rely on the linebacker anymore. I could make my own calls. And I can say that I was 99.9% right most of the time, based on the formations.
I would say that we all, in different levels, are dealt certain hands, right? And it's just, you were dealt a certain hand and you learned how to play it, is how I would describe this. And it was difficult because being a down lineman, I initially thought you were a linebacker, so I thought, well, maybe you get, because you can use hand signals, things like that. But when you're a down lineman, that's not possible. So you're actually having to, like you said, do your own audibles or know it so well that you're calling your own. And then are you just going off basically
it's
when the
not
ball
just that.
moves, when the snap goes?
Yeah, it's not just that. It's the backfield motion too, right? Like if the fullback goes right, well, then that's that's another adjustment too. So I had to look through the legs. So this is all information that I'm having to process in 20 seconds. And it's something, it seemed impossible when I started doing it. And then it just became, I can do this, and then I got better at it. Now, like when I watch a game, it's weird because you can train your brain to do just about anything. And it sounds outrageous and outlandish, but I'm telling you, like, I see things differently. It's almost like seeing it unfold ahead of time. And so that's one of the reasons why I played special teams too. I had the Edmonton franchise record for most special teams. Even though I'm a big guy, I just always knew where the ball was going to be, So it was one of I think that extra in understanding tendencies and where, these guys like to kick. So that's not the only thing I did. His motion was I would get in and I would try to figure out psychologically where guys wanted to throw or where kickers like to kick the ball, or what, where when we're in this part of the field, he's going to kick it here. Or he likes to kick it out of bounds, or he likes to keep it between the hash and the sideline. Yeah. All of those things, right? And then you just take that information and you just make an informed choice.
Made you a better student of the game, I would argue. When you played on teams, you played obviously in high school, you played in college at the University of Northern Colorado, and then you went to the CFL. Did you ever have teammates treat you differently because of it that you noticed?
You know what? I didn't really. It's funny because I was a weird mix of I didn't really enjoy the fact that I was hearing impaired and I didn't really care. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I could do anything about it. So I didn't tend to dwell on that. And to be honest with you, if somebody was making fun of me, I wouldn't really catch it anyway. You know what I mean? I was blessed with the ability to not really hear that stuff going on. And there were some times when I would catch it and maybe somebody would make a remark, but there's really, for me, I didn't really get too in my feelings about it, right? Because there's nothing I can do about it, right? So I just tried to turn it into something that could be a positive. But yeah, definitely, when I was younger, I was a lot more sensitive about it, especially when I was in junior high. Those were the years when I really struggled with it. I would never go back and do junior high again, ever. Like I hated junior high. It was really difficult.
I think we're all in agreement of that. I had my hearing and I would not do junior high again either.
I was always pretty blessed with, genetics, my dad being a professional athlete. And I was, I just tried to build on that and try to take it as far as I could. Listen, if I hadn't played football, I wouldn't have gone to university because my audiologist says, I have no idea how you made it through college. I didn't graduate. I went for 5.5 years, and I have enough credits I have like 100 and something, 180 something credits, but I don't have enough credits in one discipline to graduate. They don't give out general studies degrees anymore. Anyway, but I went for the experience, had a wonderful time.
Yeah. How underestimated do you think you were in your professional football career?
I think I can tell you just by the route I took, when I went from high school. The high school coach I had, I think he was well intentioned, but he wouldn't send my film into any Division I schools. He would only send them to RMAC schools like Fort Lewis, Mesa, maybe a couple like Bethany and Kansas. And I knew I was better than that, so I sent my own film to the University of Northern Colorado. And they were in between coaches. Bob Blasey had a long run there. He retired. And so I kind of fell between the cracks. So oddly enough, I got a track scholarship to the University of Northern Colorado because I was a triple jumper and a sprinter. And I actually triple jumped 47 feet in high school. I tell my kids that, they don't believe me.
Wow.
But I was a really good triple jumper. And then I got the scholarship, but then I ended up walking on for football. And I made the football team and I quit track. So I never actually ran a track meet or in a track meet for UNC. I just wanted to play football. So I walked on and then I went to Edmonton, same way. I didn't get drafted. They didn't even know I was Canadian. I went into training camp with Winnipeg as an American, and then they got me approved as a Canadian because they found out I was born in Canada. And then I got hurt, and then I went to Edmonton. So I was never like anybody's first choice. I was always the guy that kind of came in through the back door and made my own way. And I think I'm better off for it because nothing was ever handed to me. And I think I have a higher appreciation for all the things that come along with being an athlete. You know, when you get it handed to you, I think sometimes it's easier to take it for granted. So
sure.
I don't think you could say it any better. I think that happens all the time, almost in every part of life. The harder you work for something, the more you appreciate it. I mean, the fact that you did 13 years up at the CFL. So what are some of the highlights of your career up there during that decade and 3 years?
You know, my dad, it was really good because my dad played in the league for 7 years up there. And like I said, when he was there, they were paying their athletes more than the NFL guys. So they were like really top tier NCAA guys that went up there. Guys like Jim Stillwagon, who played in Oklahoma State. And then there was Johnny Rogers, the ordinary superstar. They were guys,
Doug Flutie,
Joe Theismann was up there. I played against Doug Flutie. That was a thrill. I sacked him a few times, actually, 3 or 4 times. I played with Doug's brother, Darren. Darren was one of the greatest receivers ever in the Canadian Football League. So, I mean, there were a lot of highlights, but I think most of the highlights that I had, and football was certainly no exception. It was a lot of fun. We won a championship. My dad and I are on the trophy together, the Grey Cup Championship trophy. It's the Canadian version of the Super Bowl. It's been around since 1909. And there are plaques for, over 100 years on that thing. And as fate would have it, my plaque from 1993 when we won is right below my dad's 1968 on the trophy.
Awesome.
So it's like
That's
crazy.
cool.
It's wild that we would win the same trophy, but even wilder that we would be right next to each other. So my rewards came off the field. My dad told me before I came to Edmonton about what a great city it is and how, there's a lot of volunteers, because winter is like 9 months here. So there's not a lot to do in the wintertime. But in the summertime, everybody makes up the lost time because the sun doesn't go down till midnight here in the summer. It comes up at like 4:30 and it goes down at midnight. And so they take advantage of it. So everybody gets out. There's lots of powwows, there's gatherings, there's celebrations, festivals. You can play softball you can golf. You can get 36 holes in a day here easily. It's amazing. Yeah, it's a wonderful community. And this community, it's a small town disguised as a big city. Like everybody knows everybody. And so my dad told me early on, I'll volunteer for as much as you can, raise up your profile, and the city will take care of you. And that's exactly what happened. To this day, like I'm 55 and I have more on my plate now than I think I did when I was playing in terms of community engagement. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah. So you're doing a lot with the community, and I think you're speaking to youth groups. I mean, what's the message you give these folks?
Well, we've been talking about it, about overcoming challenges. I don't call them obstacles. I just think everybody has to work around things. I mean, it's a spectrum. Some people have a little bit more on their plate. Some people don't. And I think that it's a trap to fall into where people will look around at other people and say, oh, they don't have to work as hard. And that's dangerous because you just don't know. You don't know what's in somebody's head, And I know people have looked at me and said, man, everything comes so easily to you. And I'm like, man, you have no idea. I make it look easy because I've had to work so hard for so long. And I also think that if you quit, then you've already beaten yourself. Something that my dad told me. He says, well, you've got 2 options. You can quit and you're already done. Or you can try, and even if you miss, you probably have done more than 95% of the people out there have. Every level you go up in football, it gets exponentially more difficult. And I've been trying to tell my sons that. I've got 3 boys, 2 of them here in the house now, and they both play football. But I always warned them, I'm like, listen, you might think it's easy now, but it gets harder and harder the higher you go. And the harder you work now, the better off you'll be down the road.
Jed, tell us, because you won a Grey Cup, like you had mentioned. Your dad won too, correct? Yeah. Tell us the fun story about how you misplaced your Grey Cup ring.
Well, yeah, I won a Grey Cup ring, and I don't have it on right now. Won in 1993, and as is the case with most championship teams, you order a ring, and it comes, and that's a pretty big moment. You get it in a box, it's got your name on it, and you wear it everywhere. You get in for free at the clubs and stuff, and people are oohing and awing over it. So I wear my ring all over it. But I think it was in 2000, we were in Toronto, and we had just gotten through playing at the Skydome, and we had beaten the Argos. And my dad was there, and I just got done having a cigar with my dad up in the Founders Club, up in the top of the Skydome. It's the little bar that they have there. It's like an executive level lounge, and had some teammates in there. So we were drinking a few brandies and smoking cigars, acting like we were rich, but we weren't. We played the CFL. None of us were getting any money, so it looked good anyway. And so I said goodbye to my dad, and I hopped in a cab. And the week before, we had played Toronto at our house. And I had grabbed their punt returner on a play, and I felt a pop, and it felt like I not dislocated, but just popped my finger. And then I went to the sideline after the tackle, and I realized my finger was crooked. So anytime I give somebody the finger, the guy next to them thinks I'm flipping them off. So at the time, I actually popped it back in, went to the sideline, showed the trainer. He started to tape it, and he popped it back out. So I punched him in the chest, dropped him, took the tape from him and taped it back up, and then went back in. But it was pretty painful. So I'm sitting in the cab the next week after the game, and we're on the QEW and the 401, which is the busiest intersection in Canada. And I've got my hand out, the window's cracked about this much. And out of the blue, I don't know what the cab driver was thinking, but he rolled my window up. And as the window came up, it came pinched on my finger. So I grabbed it reflexively, and my ring got caught on the window. And I saw the ring, just like slow motion. It just went down, hit the windowsill, bounced once, bounced twice. I put my hand, no! And it was gone. And the last time I ever saw that ring, and it's like 8 lanes. It's concrete girder, 8 lanes, concrete girder. There's no shoulders, no place to stop. You can't go back there. You can't close the highway. It's just like, so that was the last time I ever saw it. So I went almost 15 years without that thing. So yeah, I just replaced it about 7 years ago. I got it remade from Jostens. But like I said, I played in the Canadian Football League. I didn't make any money, so I had to save my
Does that ring have your number on it, or does it have?
Yeah, it has, but some prisoner probably did it as a work release thing or something.
There's somebody out there who has that ring.
Yeah. I keep looking on the internet thinking I'm going to find it, but I never have.
So, what's cool, what we're going to be doing here for subscribers in the future is to give them access to some behind the scenes stuff that we do. And Joe and I generally do a pre-show, talk. It's always a lot of fun. This is the first time we get to meet our guest and we talk about stuff. And you had mentioned an aha moment, and I think that was with Gizmo Williams, right?
Yeah.
And I'd like you to share that story for our listeners because it's a pretty incredible one. And if you talk to us about Norm Casella too, that was a real heartfelt.
Well, Gizmo Williams was a kickoff returner, and he came out of East Carolina University, and one of the most incredible athletes I've ever played with at any level. He was, he's about 5'6", 5'7", and even now at almost 60, I think he's over 60 years old, he can still do triple flip off the high dive. He's an incredible athlete. Looks like he can still play. But he ran a legit 4.2 40. He had more punt returns called back than he actually scored, and he scored over 26 kick returns in his career.
Wow.
I think he had 32 called back. So, he was unreal. He played 1 year in the NFL for Buddy Ryan. Buddy Ryan and him had a big argument, so Buddy Ryan cut him, and he came back up to the CFL. If you know Gizmo, that'll make you laugh because he's one of those guys that has no shame. He'll just tell you where to go and how soon you can get there. He also played in the USFL for a couple of years there with Memphis Showboats. And his teammate was Reggie White. And Reggie White was the one that gave him his nickname, Gizmo. His name is Henry Williams. They all went to the movies one night to go see Gremlins. And right in the middle of the movie, Reggie White said, "Hey, that looks like Henry Williams. That's Gizmo's your nickname." So that it stuck from then on. And if you've ever seen Henry, he's not very good looking. He's a very ugly individual. And it's a very apt description. And we're not talking about the cute we're talking about the ugly one, like the gremlin looking Gizmo. The one that, when you put water on him, that's what he looks like. So anyway, one particular game, he's tearing it up and he's scoring touchdowns. And Toronto had a special teams player, and every team had kind of one or two special teams aces. And the Toronto Argonauts in 96 and 97 had one particular guy. His name was Norm Casella, and he was number 80, I think. And he was a receiver, a slot back, a Canadian kid. He could run like the wind, and he was very well, well-developed, great frame, just was relentless in terms of how he pursued the football. And he was always among the leaders in the league in terms of special teams tackles. And I think him and I were pretty close in 96. And then in 97, they came and played us in Edmonton at the Commonwealth Stadium. And I just was like, I just want to hit this guy. I want to hit this guy as hard as I can, because he had a couple tackles in the Grey Cup in 96 when they beat us. And so we wanted to get our revenge on them. So they came, and Gizmo catches this first punt. And they've got this scheme where I'm going to play off the line as a linebacker. I'm a bigger guy. I'm about 265. And I'm going to just pick up whatever comes like after when Gizmo clears the first wave. If there's anybody left there, I'm just going to, ear hole them. You can't hit people like that anymore. But back then it was totally legal. And so sure enough, Norm Casola peels off of his guy. And he's just about to go and get Giz. Giz had this thing where he would make this move toward the sideline and try to set the return. And so what it would do is everybody would automatically adjust whether they wanted to or not. Their eyes would be drawn to the fact that he was heading toward the sideline, and then he would make his way toward the field. And so as soon as he set that, I didn't adjust. I just kept running straight. And Norm Casola had seen him make that, so he tried to peel back. And then as soon as he went to go reach for Gizmo, I hit him with everything I had. And he went back, and there's film on the internet of it. It's a YouTube. It's a black and white video, which makes me feel really old, but it's from the actual game film. And I hit him so hard, and that's the hardest I've ever hit anybody. It was just words don't describe what that feels like. When you hit somebody like that, it's just such a cathartic release of at an atomic level, it's just beautiful, And so I'm like, man, this is the greatest hit I've ever had. This is awesome, and this is I'm euphorically just, it's my Zen moment, right? I'm just at one with everything, the universe. And I'm standing over him, right? And I'm like, he's not going to get up. He's not going to get up. And Gizmo scores a touchdown. He goes about 70 yards. And then sure enough, Norm just kind of shook his out and he just got up and jogged off to the sideline. I'm like, what? That's not possible, right? Like, how did he do that? So then some time passes. That I kind of forget about it. I don't think about that after that game. I actually think they ended up beating us. They were a really good team. Doug Flutie was a great quarterback. They actually won back-to-back Grey Cups. In '97, they won their second Grey Cup at Commonwealth Stadium. And so training camp came around the next year in 1998, and it's announced that Norm Casola, the guy that I had hit on that play, passed away from cancer. And so I called around and I asked him, what's going on with that? Like, nobody knew that he had cancer. Well, apparently Norm Casola had made a deal with the coach, Don Matthews, who ended up being our head coach a few years later in Edmonton, that he wouldn't tell anybody that he had terminal cancer. He had I think it was testicular cancer. And he'd already had surgery to remove one, or if not both. And then the doctors had told him he was terminal. So he was taking painkillers just to get through games. And so not only did I hit him as hard as I could, but this man was dying. And he took everything I had, and I just had more respect for that individual. I went from, everybody, when you're in competition with somebody, you try to psych yourself up and you try to dehumanize the person you're playing against. But that was probably one of the biggest come to Jesus moments for me that I've ever had, where I realized, there's a bigger picture. There's exterior forces at play that none of us have any idea about. And so when I say you just don't know what people are battling, you don't make assumptions. You might think that somebody next to you has it better than you. But that was just a real world example of all those things coming into play. And 6 months later, me having an epiphany about something, I thought it was one way, but it was completely different. And so I consider myself blessed to have been in that moment with that person and having that memory of him, because after he passed away, I shared that memory with the sports writer named Perry Lefko. And he actually ended up writing a really beautiful feature on Norm. It's online if you look hard enough for it. But that's the beauty of playing football or playing any sport. You get to see and do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do if you were sitting on your couch.
Yeah, what a great story. Yeah, I think, like you said, Norm was there, maybe on a spiritual level, not to get too out there, but on a spiritual level to help teach you something in that moment, Jed. And now I feel like I just learned something as well. So it's like this butterfly effect, trickle down, domino effect. You're absolutely right. You never know what's going on with somebody else. And as human beings, we do that a lot. We either compare, like you said, oh, he's got it easier, or, oh, they've got it rougher than me, so I shouldn't be upset about what's going on with me. Just comparison sucks the joy out of everything,
Oh,
one.
yeah.
And two, it's just nonsense that we do that. And so that, thank you for that, because that helped me learn, even strengthen it more.
You know,
Okay,
when you talk about your daughter having worn a hearing aid from a very early age, like right away, I'm like, man, I envy her. I wish that would have happened to me. You know, it would have made my life so much easier. And so it's amazing to me, like the advances they made with hearing aids, and like I can answer phone calls on my hearing aid now. Like I don't even need to, I'm using my son's Chromebook and he uses it for school. That's why I don't have it piped into my hearing aids right now. I'm doing the old school way, but for years I'd have to try to figure out how to put a headphones on. So even just, connecting with you guys today, I'm like, my hearing aid's whistling a little bit. But these hearing aids that they make now are just amazing, man. Like you can do all kinds of things. I can watch TV. It's amazing. Like if, and you're right, it's human nature to do that though, to look around and go, oh, why does that person have so easy and I have to work so hard? I think that's part of the lesson though. I think that sometimes in order for us as people to constitutionally appreciate something, I think we do need to work harder for it, because I think if it's handed to us, that's why I try to make my kids work a little bit harder. My wife's like, why are you so hard on them? I'm like, well, like once they walk out that front door, like nobody else cares about them like we do. You know what I mean? So if we don't prepare them for that, we're not doing them any justice. So we have to be sure that we give them examples, real-time examples of what it's going to be like when they get out there. So I love the fact that you did that for your daughter, because it would have just made things a lot easier for me if I would have had those 5 years or 6 years of experience. Because it's not like when you're wearing a hearing aid, it's not the real sound. It's totally different. From what I'm told, I've never heard, what I know. The one thing that's interesting is they say that people that have heard before and then they go and try to wear hearing aids later in their life struggle a lot more, because they know what it sounds like apparently. And I don't know, you can maybe correct me if you've had that experience, but that's something that I tell people when they say, well, I'm going to get a hearing aid. And I'm like, well, you got to be wary of this, the fact that it's not what you're going to hear is not the way you're used to hearing. So you just have to make adjustments. And that's the way. You can either quit or you can keep going. So.
Well, and it was amazing when that happened, and immediately they sent some sort of social services to us to help us with sign language. I mean, we were prepping, but it's not bad at all. No. And what's wild about this girl is she is a huge music fan. And she loves, don't say anything bad about Taylor Swift, else you're going to get a black eye, right? So you just don't know the gifts that are given to you. And for us, that's what it was. And that's why it was really important for us to have you on, because we all have our own obstacles. We all have our own obstacles to make it to a certain goal. And some have different roads to take. And the fact is, you excelled in a profession where you're on a team. You got to be able to communicate. And Jed, 13 years in professional football is pretty unbelievable. And I wonder, I hope, I kind of don't want to ask this question, but I kind of do. I almost think getting to know you, I think I know the answer, but do you feel like if you hadn't had a hearing issue, would you have played in the NFL? Do you ever think about that at all?
I think that it would have been easier. I think that would have been, I think so. I think because there was a lot of personality issues, I think, with some of the coaches I played for. I didn't do myself any favors because I was so good at lip reading and I was so good at like picking up on things when I could see people, that when I wasn't looking at them and then I didn't pick up on things, people thought I wasn't paying attention or that I wasn't taking it seriously or, I wasn't the most secure. Like my mom and dad split up. And so I had some issues around that. Missing my dad, and I only got to see him in the summer times. And so I was emotionally dealing with grief of separation between my parents splitting up when I was 7 years old, grief of being different. So I had a really hard time kind of adjusting sometimes, especially with transitions, moving from practice to school or one thing to another. Sure. And so it was really difficult. And so, I would say that if I could hear, it would have been a lot easier for me. I wouldn't have missed out on so much. There were lots of times when I missed out on friendships with people because I didn't hear them say hello. I can tell you for a fact that my high school coach didn't understand me because he didn't know how to approach it. I had a really good coach in college that wouldn't let me quit. I walked off the practice field one day because I got frustrated because I couldn't hear what was going on. Like there was an adjustment that I was having a really difficult time with, and I got really frustrated and I started to cry and I left. And then he was like, he didn't know. He had no idea. My linebacker coach, and I broke it down for him, and he goes, "I had no idea." And I'm like, "Well," because I didn't talk to anybody. And that's the other thing about being hearing impaired is that it drew me out of my shell and it forced me to get out of my comfort zone. In order for me to be more effective as a communicator, the onus was on me, not on anybody else, right? And I was naturally, and hard to believe my sisters will disagree with this, but I'm naturally a shy person, and I don't like to put myself out there. Now that I'm older, it doesn't bother me because I don't really have much ego around that. I'm old, I'm getting balder, right? I don't really care about that anymore. But the only reason I wore one hearing aid, guys, I'm going to be honest with you, is because I was worried about what girls thought. That's it. No, nothing more simple.
Hey,
it's
that's
just
absolutely understandable.
And I missed out on so much
I would have
in
been
life.
the same way.
Yeah. So I didn't want people to notice it, and that's why I wore my hair long for a long time, and I still do. So
Jed, as we wrap up, what's the one question that we didn't ask you that we should have asked you today?
I guess maybe once you got done playing football, what was that like? And that's one thing that when I talk to athletes, and it's not just football, it's any sport, anything that you get really good at, and then you identify with that and you become that, and that's who you are. That's who you identify as, and that's who you present. When that ends, what is that like? That's tough. And I'm going to be very real with you. When I got done playing, I was pretty fortunate. I didn't talk about the injuries I had. I came back from one catastrophic Achilles injury, came back and played 4 or 5 more years. And so when people ask me, did you enjoy it? Or did you, I soaked every minute of joy out of it, because I knew it could end at any minute, not only being hearing impaired and playing at all, but also coming back from a major injury. But when I broke my right foot and then I couldn't play anymore after 13 years, that was a really difficult adjustment, because that's who I was, and that was taken from me. When you have something like that happen, it's very difficult. And that's when you have to really work on relying on your network that you have, your network of people. And it doesn't have to be, but I've always said, every professional athlete or every elite athlete dies twice. First time is when they get done playing. Yes. And the second time is when they leave the earth. The first time, in some ways, is a lot rougher, because that's who you are as a kid, and you build this persona, and then all of a sudden, boom, this isn't who I am anymore, right? And whether you're right or not, it doesn't matter. That's how you feel, and those are your feelings about it. So you really have to figure out and, develop, work on you're relying on your network and reach out to. So sometimes it's great just to talk to somebody who doesn't have any skin in the fight, get a therapist, talking to somebody on the phone, those types of things. When I was a kid, we didn't talk. I talked to my doctor, first of all, and it was funny because my grandfather died the same year. And so my doctor said to me, and he had to he crystallized it for me. He says, listen, your grandfather died, you're moving, your career ended, and you're going through a major injury. And so he said, any one of those would be enough for me to consider sending you to see therapy. He said, you've got 4, 5. And he goes, he says, I'm actually astounded that you even came through the door. So I went and I spoke to a therapist and was able to kind of come around in terms of like what I thought maybe what my next phase of life would look like. It wasn't an easy process. It wasn't like I had an aha, I'm fine. It's been a journey, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that, the paradox is the older you get, the less you care about things. The things that we thought were really important, like looking cool, you tend to let that go when you get a little bit older, right? Yeah. So I just try to give back by coaching and try to talk to kids about just focusing on what's important. And like you guys said, don't worry about what other people are doing. Just concentrate on what you can do, what you can control, which is basically how you respond. So,
yeah, and maybe just accept what you've been given to, and not hiding it. I mean, we've all got those issues. Maybe you wore one hearing aid, but all of us have a story like that, and especially when it comes to girls, man. You just
we do crazy things to
it's
them,
unreal.
Right?
Yeah. So what did you redefine yourself to, Jed? What do you?
So what I ended up doing, and this is funny, one of the epiphanies that came out of that one of the aha moments was, what do I see myself doing? What gives me joy? What do I want to get out of bed and do?
Yeah.
I tried sales. I'm a really good salesman, but I don't make any money because I don't want anybody to feel like I'm taking advantage of them. Not that's what sales is about, but sometimes it is. So I had to get out of that because I wasn't doing very well. I wasn't making enough money to really kind of sustain myself. So something that I started to dabble in was along the lines of when I was doing community relations and community engagement. We were going into schools all over the province of Alberta. I think I've probably been, I've done thousands of appearances over my lifetime. And so I had some experience doing some mentorship. And so what I ended up doing was I started working in I guess, the Canadian version of a juvie hall. And so it's kind of like the last house on the block for kids that sort of like either they're going to turn it around or they're going to go down a dark path and maybe end up in the prison system. And so I started working at a halfway house, a ranch facility north of Edmonton. And I just really enjoyed it. They paid me to hang out with these kids and mentor them, take them to visits, hang out, play some football or shoot baskets or play some baseball. And it was just more about like spending time trying to teach them a different way of solving problems. There's some kids that are organically predisposed to just act out and then just trying to figure out workarounds, just like what I had to do with my hearing. You know, man, I'm not going to hear it, but maybe I can do it a different way. And just trying to teach kids a different way to deal with their anger. And I continue to do that to this day. I'll never be a wealthy man, but I'll always feel rich, you know? So
yeah, because you know what life is? You know what happens when you get into your 50s? Yeah. You begin to recognize that life is all about love, man.
Yeah.
And if you've got that.
It's acts of service and yes.
Totally.
Yeah. I find the servitude is the one thing that makes me feel like I don't have to take a shower after I go home from work. You know what I mean? Like if I'm doing something that benefits someone else and I'm not really getting that much out of it, it's weird. It's like a paradox, right? And my dad talked to me about that really early in my life. He says, you know, you got to go out and do as much as you can to let people know that you're in it for the right reasons and you're not just there to get yours. And especially today, you know, so many people are out there trying to raise their own profiles that they lose sight of the fact that, you know what, we're all in this together. We're not just doing it on our own. And I think that with technology, it's a wonderful thing, but I think sometimes people lose that. You lose sight of the fact that we're connected, man. Like we're not. And with all this division that we have going on right now, it's scary sometimes. And so I try to tell my kids, I'm like, listen, man, if you're not doing something that doesn't benefit you, but benefits somebody else, you're going to get a lot more out of that than you are from, you know, showing off your diamond rings and stuff like that online. Like that's just, there's no joy in that long term.
I love it.
I think it's very true. Yeah. Well, Jed, we want to thank you. We really appreciate your insight, your stories, and we wish you well in your future endeavors and what you're doing. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, man. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
We would like to express our gratitude to Jed Roberts for joining us on Life After Fame. Jed's remarkable 13-year professional football career serves as a shining example of what individuals can achieve when they wholeheartedly believe in their abilities, irrespective of the obstacles they face. Despite his hearing impairment, Jed overcame tremendous challenges, relying solely on his sight and instincts to not only participate, but excel in football, despite being severely limited in communication. Jed's dedication went beyond merely playing the game or being content with making the team. Renowned for his aggressive playing style and powerful hits on the field, he played an instrumental role in the Edmonton Eskimos' victorious Grey Cup campaign. This narrative underscores the profound impact of belief. Presently, Jed utilizes his inspiring story to motivate and empower the youth he works with today. We sincerely value your support here at Life After Fame. If you or someone you know has a captivating tale of their own 15 minutes of fame, we invite you to reach out to us at joe@lifeafterfamenow.com. We would be thrilled to engage in a conversation and share your story with our audience. We hope you had a great time watching and listening to that episode. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more exciting content. To catch up on previous episodes and stay updated with our fresh releases, visit us at lifeafterfamenow.com or subscribe to our podcast on any platform. Join us every Tuesday as we bring you captivating interviews with new guests, each with their own unique story. In this episode, we had the pleasure of hosting former CFL standout Jed Roberts, thanks to whom we had an incredible discussion. I'm Joe M., along with my co-host Joe B. from Life After Fame podcast, wishing you an amazing week, and we'll see you on the next episode.